Supporters of veteran Black Panther political prisoner and journalist Mumia Abu Jamal, who's been imprisoned in the United States for almost 40 years, are calling for his release in the face of his deteriorating health. An emergency press conference was held on Thursday to demand that Mumia be allowed to call his wife, spiritual advisor and medical consultant as he was being held incommunicado after being rushed to hospital with chest pains over the weekend. He's scheduled to undergo heart surgery. Mumia suffers from several pre-existing conditions and became ill with COVID-19, losing 30 pounds. Mumia Abu Jamal was tried, convicted and sentenced to death in 1982 for the murder of Philadelphia police officer Daniel Faulkner. For the next 30 years, he was held in isolation on death row and kept there for over 10 years, even though a federal judge ordered his death sentence to be overturned in 2001. Mumia remains in prison under a sentence of life without parole. The trial against him failed to meet international standards and was politically biased, taking place in a context that prevented him from receiving an impartial and fair hearing. And joining us to discuss the campaign for Mumia Abu Jamal's release, we now welcome Mark Taylor, Professor of Theology and Culture at Princeton Theological Seminary and spiritual advisor to Mumia. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you for covering this struggle.
Mark, one of the demands on learning of Mumia's hospitalization was for him to be able to speak to you as his spiritual advisor. Were you able to speak to him, and what can you tell us about his current state of health and the conditions in which he's being held?
I have not been able to speak to him as of yet. The only person who has been able to speak to him is Wadia. The movement has put pressure. Wadia is the wife of Mumia Abu Jamal. The movement has put pressure on the system, the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, to allow Mumia to call her once a day for 15 minutes. We have had one of those calls go out so far. We have minimal information, though, about what his condition is and about the state of his health. Listen, we don't even know where his hospital is for sure. I had to go out yesterday looking for the hospital and spent several hours doing so, and finally found the place where we think he is based on the security at that hospital, but we have not been able to get through. None of our doctors have, and certainly none of his family. I have not, even though they have my phone numbers. So this is completely out of the ordinary. They are not to deny contact with medical personnel, with family, or with spiritual advisors, but this is part of the struggle.
Mark, for any of our viewers who are unfamiliar with the case, could you explain the context in which Mumia was tried and convicted and your role as a member of his support network?
Yes, Mumia Abu Jamal, as a teenager, was a member of the Black Panther Party, serving as its Minister of Information in his teen years. He was only there for a couple of years, but he made a vast impression, and the Black Panther movement made a big impression on him. After that, he became a revolutionary independent journalist writing against police brutality in his native Philadelphia, particularly police brutality against the MOVE organization. As he continued to write against police brutality, he was increasingly singled out by police forces and other political forces of repression. He was threatened several times, and finally he was found shot alongside a police officer in 1981 and was beaten at that scene by police, beaten again in the paddy wagon on the way to the hospital, and then dumped on the emergency room floor. He is still suffering chronic damages from that abuse. They have tried to kill him through medical neglect in the hospital in the indirect ways that they can. This is still a problem that we are seeking to right in as many ways as possible. I, for one, have for the past 20 years been part of a group called Educators for Mumia Abu Jamal. We have organized to move Mumia's struggle into our classrooms on our campuses. In the year 2000, we had some 2,000 members working at different campuses all across the country, and about 800 signing a New York Times Magazine ad on his behalf. So this work continues by many of us in many different walks of life in this country.
Mark, given the current situation and the lack of knowledge about Mumia's condition at the moment, what are the next steps in the struggle for his release and ultimately to clear his name?
The next steps are twofold. First of all, we have to advocate for his freedom now as the only kind of treatment that will really make a difference. And not only freedom for him, but freedom for all of the elders that's decided that one is elderly when one is over the age of 50 or 55 in our prisons. We want all of these people brought home, especially all of the sick. Mumia certainly qualifies. We are pressing that case. Then also, we have to remember that a judge in December 2019 declared it possible for Mumia to re-argue all of his appeals, all of his claims to innocence. At one point, he had 29 claims of the violation of his due process rights. He is able to re-argue those in court, and we are putting a movement behind our lawyers for that end, even though the Philadelphia district attorney is doing all he can to block that at the present time. The UN is always also stepping forward with some efforts at this time, although they are still being clarified and communicated to officials in the United States.
Mark Taylor, Professor of Theology and Culture and Spiritual Advisor to Mumia Abu Jamal, thank you so much for joining us today, for shedding more light on the struggle for Mumia's release and into the injustice that he faces in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you.